Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And with TBC's announcement and quite rapidly its date coming forward, we're all going to have to make a decision here with what we want to play and what we want to do in World of Warcraft. And I know that that's been really challenging for myself personally, because you're only going to get that one level boost if you're going to utilize that level boost, or you're going to have to manually level up a character, which can take a tremendous amount of time and effort. So you really want to make sure that you're making the right choice for your gameplay experience. So the purpose of this tier list is going to be sharing my opinion of the ranged DPS in TBC, their competitive viability in PvP, their fun level, so how long can you play something without getting bored of it, and a little bit more variety, so maybe some world PvP considerations or some battleground considerations. So if you're not just all about trying to get glad, you're not just all about trying to be the highest rated, you want to have some fun, talking about the validity of these specializations as well in those circumstances. And that's going to be the main point of that. Having played the TBC beta quite a lot, I've gotten to experience playing with these specializations and playing them myself, and also participating in things like the Asmongold Invitational and really analyzing the tournament play to gather data on what TBC is going to be looking like the second time around, because some things are obviously going to shift. Our ability to gather knowledge and share knowledge is massively increased in terms of its scale, so metas are possibly going to shift. So here in the ranged DPS, let's just get started. We'll be looking at shaman, so elemental shaman specifically, as shaman only has one ranged DPS specialization. Pretty much the only reason you're going to be bringing a shaman in PvP is bloodlust or heroism. If they didn't have this, it would be quite a struggle to be able to slot them in. Having no magic dispel, which is a very high priority dispel in PvP, especially with the prevalence of likely frost mages and warlocks to remove dots, fears, novas, and polymorphs. You don't add that as extra utility as the shaman class whatsoever. You do bring things like poison cleansing totem, which can alleviate things like wound poison a bit from rogues, which are again likely to be seen a lot of, but that little tiny utility doesn't really shore up things like running out of mana, and mana burn is very prevalent. It's on 3 classes: warlocks, hunters, and priests, and if you get targeted down by that and the enemy team is able to survive your bloodlust or heroism, you're very quickly going to run out of steam. So this is in a competitive environment with a small group of players, so 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3. 3 versus 3 a little bit better than 2 versus 2, but still small group combat, not going to be your forte as an elemental shaman. You're going to be more focused on 5 versus 5, providing Wrath of Air Totem to increase the spell damage of Wizard Cleave 5v5 setups. I'm really excited for that. So while it's got that kind of negative downside to it for small group content, large scale content PvP, you're going to be incredibly desirable, because bloodlust across more players is just massively more value, and amplifying them through your totem utility. And also because not all the focus might be on you, right? If there's other high priority targets, you'll be able to cast a little bit more, which can be frustrating, especially against rogues or mace stun warriors. But in those large scales like 5v5 or random battlegrounds or world PvP, where you can stay at a distance and freely cast more so and buff more targets, you're going to have the most fun in those environments. So my opinion would be to stick to those large scale environments, try to avoid the small ones. Maybe you can try and make it work. You can try and play like a niche setup as an Ellie shaman, but 2v2 and 3v3 you're gonna have a bit of a struggle bus. For me overall, it's tough to give it a super high rating, because I just don't feel like it's competitive viability in the standardized kind of 2v2 3v3 landscape isn't there, although you can get gladiator from 5v5, so maybe we should take that into consideration. For me, I think it comes in at the bottom, and this is because other classes can deal their damage more instantaneously, more frequently, have more defense, have more mana. They've just got more of everything, whereas you're going to be more of like a buff to your whole team. So if that sounds interesting to you, then definitely go for the elemental shaman. To me, elemental shaman doesn't really pick up until Wrath of the Lich King. When you get lava burst, that's, I mean, everybody knows what lava burst is if you're tuning in to talk about Nelly shaman. So for me, I think it's fair to give elemental shaman at about a C tier, about below average, because in most of the content you're going to be incredible, you're going to struggle a lot, but in this large scale group content you will feel powerful. So stick to the large scale group content unless you really want to challenge. Now, balanced druid, this is another specialization where, I mean, back in the day, there's a reason they called it Umkin, and in PvE, you're going to be just attacking bosses with your staff a lot of the time. That That is the main downside of balanced druid, like just straight deep balanced druid. It's basically was non-existent. It is my expectation that it's going to continue to remain non-existent, again to the same problem where it doesn't have the immediate instant cast burst damage like you're going to see from mages, allowing them to be a lot more competitive, and it doesn't have these ranged instant crowd controls because in small scale PvP combat, things like counterspell and spell lock from Warlock not only interrupt but will also silence the target through talents, obviously, for improved counterspell, but by being able to silence a target, you can then stop healing and then do damage to a target. Boomkin does not have that in TBC. So you bring Moonkin Aura, very desirable in PvE and raid combat, kind of similar to the elemental shaman, where you're more valuable the more players there are. So things like battlegrounds, sure, you're going to be able to shapeshift. You still probably wouldn't want to be boomkin flag carrier, but you could buff the group up a lot more by providing that aura and by being able to relocate around the battlefield and go into stealth and for sneak attacks and stuff like that. So battlegrounds, world PvP, that's going to be where you want to be. Maybe there's some cheesy 5v5 comp, but even there, I think it's tough for you to really find a spot as a boomkin. If you want sort of this boomkin-esque playstyle, then you're going to want to go with like a dream state build, which is not going all the way deep down into the moonkin talent tree, but provides you more mana regen and a lot more healing options from the restoration talent tree. That is a great 1v1 spec. And again, if you're going into TBC and you really want to make the balanced druid work, then stick to battlegrounds. Stick to large combat, open field, world PvP. You can get big Starfire crits. You can run talents so your Starfire stuns. You can annoy people with that. But when it comes to super competitive play, I mean, maybe you can multi-box 5 boomkins in 5v5. Maybe that sounds fun. I know people used to do that kind of stuff way back when. But competitive viability, I think it's going to fall off the face of the earth. So for me, I'm giving it a very low ranking. I'm giving it a D ranking. But if you want to have fun and you really want to try and make it work, then you will have a good time, decent time at least in battlegrounds. But running out of mana is a really big problem. And now with the knowledge of players, they are going to target you and mana burn you. And when you're yeah, you're just going to be hitting people with a stick. It's not going to be the best experience overall. So for me, it's hard to recommend it. But if you want to, stick to battlegrounds. Mage. Now here I've only got Mage rather than going into like Fire, Arcane, and Frost, because for the most part, you've got to think of these classes as classes, unlike Boomkin and Ellie Shaman, where it's obvious that they only have one ranged DPS spec. I don't really consider like Mage as Fire or Arcane specifically. Frost Mage is going to be the most dominant that you will see across the board, and that's because Shatter Combo is so powerful, and I missed Shatter Combo, I gotta tell you, from more current iterations of Frost Mage. I've almost always had like a Frost Mage alt. The last time I remember doing it was in Cataclysm, when they introduced Ring of Frost, and you'd shatter you could shatter off Ring of Frost, you could shatter off Nova with Ice Lance. Like this, that is going to be probably the most high intensity damage of basically almost any class in the game. Although right now in the beta, Frost Nova is seemingly bugged. It's not proven yet that it's bugged, but it doesn't seem to be breaking on a huge amount of damage dealt into it. If it ends up going like that, then Frost Mage is going to be spectacular. I don't think that it comes into the same competitive viability territory as Affliction or Demonology was. Soul Link, well, this is the trouble of trying to label specific specs to classes in TBC. You got to think of them more as a class and kind of get out of the viewpoint of thinking them as specs, because the specs are a bit more underdeveloped in TBC as opposed to the class as a whole. So don't go into that with that mentality like I'm a fire mage. I don't think that will be the best experience. Think of it as you got Palm Pyro and you've got Ice Lance Mage, where you're going to be just Ice Lancing into Frost Novas or as a more deep Frost Mage spec. The Palm Pyro build could be super good if you're not incredibly talented at the game and you just want to run in and blow somebody up. I mean, that's the history of Palm Pyro. But when you get to more competitive levels, players will see it coming, who you're targeting when you're popping, and avoid that, and then they'll come back at you, and you'll have more frequency of burst damage playing Frost. So it would be my recommendation to play Frost, and for the aforementioned reasons. And it's spectacular in 2s, great in 3s, awesome in 5s, great in battlegrounds, decent in 1v1. For me, I'm not giving it S tier because it's not a class I think that you will slot in every situation. its flexibility is a little bit more limited, but it has good flexibility. It's just not infinite. And I think the infinite flexibility is what enables the spec to get, or class to get up onto the S tier. So for me personally, stick to Frost, play Palm Pyro if you just want to have some cheesy fun, but don't expect it to be super competitive. Don't think of it as like deep arcane mage or stuff like that, because the specs don't have as much of an identity as they develop more later on, to where you can think of them like, oh, Destro is Chaos Bolt. Well, guess what? Chaos Bolt doesn't exist. Or it's really tough to label a class as a specific spec. Classes are more known for their talents. And then that's when we look at Warlock, you'll see that, right? So Soul Link Warlock involves going deeper into the demonology tree. So you might think of it as a demonology Warlock, but in my mind, it's still somewhat just an affliction Warlock. You're just maintaining damage over time effects. You do a tremendous amount of damage. You're very tanky on the Warlock, but you need to be running the Soul Link build. There are options to go deep Demonology and get Felguard, and that I would almost consider that more so a Demonology build than just the Soul Link specific one. You can go Affliction, but you think of Affliction just more as like instant Howl of Terror as the trade-off, and I still think Soul Link is going to be more valuable in that case. But Seed of Corruption is insane in Battlegrounds. You will do an insane amount of damage. In an AV, if you sit back and cast Seed of Corruptions into groups of people, yeah, that's fireworks. That is like the best. If you want to blast people in Battlegrounds, that's going to be numero uno situation that you want to be getting into on a class. It's excellent in twos, probably one of the best specs in twos. You're flexible. You can play with rogues. You can play with mages. You can play with healers in twos. In threes, you're the most desirable class in the game, as long as you're running Soul Link and not playing Destro. And I played with a Destro. That was really tough. I'm not even going to try and talk about where to put Destro. To me, Destro doesn't even start to exist as a class until you get Chaos Bolt. But in this case, I think it's more, think of it, Lock as Affliction, Soul Link, kind of that type of build, like the Dot Warlock. I think that's where your power is, that's where your identity is, and that's where you'll want to focus in TBC. And if you want to be that niche and try Destro, go for it. But I would not recommend it as opposed to the standard builds. For me, it's very difficult not to put Warlock on S tier due to its power in small group content, its power in duels, its power in large scale content like Battlegrounds. It's insane 1v1, bringing Blanket, Counterspell, and Mortal Coil, so instant crowd controls that prevent healing or enemies from hitting you. Synergize so heavily with things like stuns because they don't share the same diminishing return, that you can chain those together and just absolutely destroy somebody. So having those added crowd control effects on top of a massive damage potential, on top of being so tanky, and you're great in everything, and you will have a blast on it. There's no doubt in my mind that I can't not put Warlock in S tier. I can't not recommend you play it, especially if you're sticking to Soul Link build, not Demonology or Destro. But Soul Link, Affliction, Dot, you're gonna want to check that out. If I don't, even myself, I'm kind of regretting it because I leveled a Mage on Classic to farm gold, and I was thinking like, maybe I'll have a Mage alt, but now I'm thinking like, oh man, I should have done a Warlock. Yeah, they're really good, and that's still true. Moving now onto the beta, Hunter. This is a spec or a class I think that most players at the start, due to the game actually being quite fast with lower levels of resilience, or most players are going to play Beast Mastery. And you think of this as you're going into Marksman to get Scatter Shot, or you're going into the Survival talent tree to get Wyvern Sting, which are just instant crowd controls. To me, the value of Wyvern Sting is quite low at the moment because there are a lot of classes that are strong that can remove poisons. And Stoneform also, you can use it while you're already in a Wyvern Sting to remove it. So that's almost a direct counter to it. Going Beast Mastery just provides you ease of access damage. And that is very valuable if you want to run targets down. I mean, Beast Mastery in TBC was known for being a one-button macro. So if you want a really easy, simple class to play, go on to the Hunter. It does obviously have a lot more complicated niche effects to it, like having to land traps at the highest level. But it's overall, because you can't be interrupted, and the removal of the dead zone, you'll be able to attack with melee or ranged at all times. Means that that little bit of a frustration will be gone. Bringing in Frost Trap to snare multiple targets. Bringing in Flare to try and find rogues when they've re-stealthed. It's going to be great utility overall, especially due to the prevalence of rogue. I think Beast Mastery comes as a pretty decent 1v1 spec. You probably struggle with some of the more durable classes that have sustainability. But in 2v2, if you pair up with a druid, this is just infinite crowd control. You pair up with a priest, you've got mana burn. We didn't even talk about that. With Viper Sting in Battlegrounds, if you want to make somebody have no fun and just enjoy all of it yourself, you just put Viper Sting up on a Mage. You put them on focus. You just keep Viper stinging them. They're out of mana. You just sit there and chuckle a little bit while you just keep shooting them. Viper sting is a very satisfying ability, incredibly frustrating for the person who is receiving it. But having Viper sting, really powerful single target damage that's just more consistent based, rather than these windows like Shatter combo for Mage. But your ability to obviously multi-target like a lock is not going to be there at all. For me, it comes in at about middle of the pack. You're going to have some really good 2v2 comps. That's going to likely be your arena niche. In 3v3, you're kind of flimsy. You're pretty fragile. So I was actually running with 2 healers when I played with a hunter to kind of ease up that and just play for mana burn strategies, which I think is a good option. Or you can try with a warlock. So that way there's more of like, who do we go after? Do we leave the warlock open or the hunter open in 3v3? And then in 5v5, I feel like Hunter falls off a bit because I think in 5v5 you're going to see either Wind Fury, Melee Cleave comps, or Wizard Cleave Heroism comps, or RMPLS, or Warrior Mage Lock. These types of combos end up being better in 5s. I think Hunter is going to be kind of on the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to 5v5. And then in Battlegrounds, being able to just post up on a base and create a nest with traps and your pet to stop caps, you're always going to be valuable in those situations. So you'll have some value in Battlegrounds. But if you want to be pushing super high and competitive, stick to 2v2. And your dueling is all right. But I think most players are going to be playing Beast Mastery. And if you go deep Beast Mastery, you're going to have a really easy talent tree. But some hunters will go Beast Mastery Scattershot to get the added crowd control and the land freezing traps. Now moving on to Priest. Looking at Shadow Priest, this spec actually is pretty good at the start, it's looking like in TBC, but you got to kind of think of yourself as a budget Warlock, and it's not always great to think of yourself as a budget anything, because then when people are looking to form groups, they're like, well, we could get you or we could get the Warlock. To me, you're going to want to pair up with crowd control classes, so Mages, great combo, and actually surprisingly Ret Paladins. I've been watching Savix and Enbany playing Ret Paladin, Shadow Priest, and having Repentance, instant crowd control for the Paladin, Hammer of Justice, Silence, and Psychic Scream is actually quite a long crowd control chain that people don't normally expect in 2v2. Or the same could be with a Mage and a Shadow Priest, Polymorph into Psychic Screams into Silence. You bring a lot of damage with Shadow Word Death. It's probably one of the hardest hitting abilities in the game. So Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death combo. You bring the ability to dispel magic. Even as a DPS, you can dispel your allies out of crowd control effects, which is incredibly valuable. So you bring that as this type of unique synergy, and it may be the case you're likely only going to want to play with mages, but in 3s, warlocks, dot cleaves, try and keep up dots and mana burn. This could be a strategy for you. To me, I think Shadow Priest is likely coming in middle of the pack along with Hunters, where you bring value in all scenarios. You're going to be more desirable than Hunter in 5v5, so maybe it makes sense that it's just slightly above. It's about mid-tier average. You can do well with it, but it's not a Warlock, and this is kind of the way the whole thing works is like, well, you're not a Warlock, so you're going to be slightly lower. I think Mages bring way more insane burst damage at the moment and ease of access to it by being instant cast with Shatter combo, and Polymorph is just so powerful. Considering not a lot of classes have the ability to dispel it. Maybe if Paladins were more popular and more competitive, then they would serve as a counter to Mages with freedom and dispel, but Paladins have so many drawbacks to their cooldowns, where they go in Forbearance and then can't use Avenging Wrath, or use Avenging Wrath and can't bubble, that these drawbacks end up backfiring so hard on them that they can't stand in that role to be a counter to Mages, which is why I think that Warlocks and Mages are coming out ahead. But this is where I would currently put the ranged DPS in terms of their power. If you're looking for fun for these bottom two, stick to large group content. These, Shadow Priest and Hunter, pretty good in everything. Mage, excellent in everything. And then Warlock is God. There you go. pretty straightforward, and it's amazing fun. So for me going into TBC, you're probably not surprised. I'm probably not going to be playing a Balanced Druid. I'm going to be playing Resto Druid, and maybe have some fun as Dream State in Battlegrounds and try and go on like some 1v3s or something like that with the extra healing bonus to it. And that's where I'm going to get my Moonkin fix. But regardless, let me know what you think in the comments down below. What are you going to be playing? What are you interested in? Again, the purpose of this list isn't necessarily to just be like, you can't play that because I've said this, right? Like, you can play whatever you want to play. I encourage you to play whatever you want to play. If you want to try and make some of these specs work in those environments and you can prove me wrong, then all the more power to you. I'd love to see it. This is more or less just sharing my personal opinion and experience and my observations of these specs over time now throughout the beta, and watching some videos and stuff about these classes as well, so that you can make a decision for yourself. Where do you want to focus your performance? Where do you want to focus your fun? And then make that choice. So other than that, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content, like the video. It greatly helps me. It's absolutely free and just lets you know when these videos go live. Other than that, that's going to be it for me in this video. We will see you in the next one.